Hello, today we're looking at the death of Virginia Giuffre, who is widely reported to have killed herself last week. According to the Sun newspaper, Giuffre's lawyer described her as being positive in the past few days and planning her future. She once tweeted, "I am making it publicly known that in no way, shape or form am I suicidal." That was in December 2019. What has happened since then? In February 2022, she received a massive payout from Prince Andrew, whom she'd accused of sexually abusing her when she was just 17 years old. She also claimed she was being controlled and abused by paedophile Jeffrey Epstein at the time. The mother of three was in the middle of divorcing her husband of over 20 years, and most recently she made the front pages when her car was hit by a bus. She said she was dying, but the authorities said she was okay. It was just a minor collision. We have Kimberly Mehlman-Orozco now. She is a sex trafficking expert who thinks Virginia's death may be suspicious. Thank you for joining us. What makes you concerned about this news?
Well, I think that given the circumstances, it is a bit of an odd situation. I think that from her family, it seemed like she was hopeful, but in the grand scheme of things, she was also going through a divorce. She had also publicly, apparently, accused her husband of some domestic violence. This is just an individual who had a very troubled background, a very troubled history, well before she ever met Jeffrey Epstein and well after. And so I think that it's just a tragic event. But I think the circumstances certainly do raise suspicion, especially in the wake of Jeffrey Epstein's alleged suicide, which was highly suspicious. And there are conflicting accounts of the information that preceded his death as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned Jeffrey Epstein's supposed suicide. We spoke to a very senior coroner after that event, CYRIL WECHT, very famous, very established, and he was sure that it was not a suicide. Let's have a quick listen to that.
3 fractures were found on Mr. Epstein. A fracture of the hyoid bone, that is a very slender U-shaped bone high up in the neck beneath the mandible, the jawbone, the base of which is pointed anteriorly. That was fractured, and then the thyroid cartilage, the Adam's apple directly beneath, had 2 fractures, one on the right side, one on the left side. In all my years of experience, and I've done many thousands of suicides, I have never seen a case in which there were 3 fractures from such a lean-in kind of a suicide. And Mr. Epstein was found in a quasi-kneeling position. He had not jumped from a height. There was no force involved. In other words, just leaning forward. This is somewhat similar to what Robin Williams did some years ago, tying something to a doorknob and leaning forward. So, you know, the basic formula from our physics days in high school tell us that energy, force equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. Mass is the head, and the velocity is a 0 in less than 1 mile an hour as you lean forward. You do not get 3 fractures like that in that kind of a scenario.
Kimberly, I'm not going to ask you to go over your thoughts about Jeffrey Epstein because we've had a very heavyweight coroner's opinion there. But I'm going to ask you about Virginia Giuffre. Everyone has said that she's committed suicide. She's taken an overdose of pills. But until that toxicology report is released, we won't be sure that she took them herself. We won't be sure that she meant to take more than she could cope with. It could have been an accident.
I think it possibly could have been an accident, but I think that the circumstances surrounding her death, the tweets prior to the accident, the pictures of her that she posted on social media being bruised and battered are certainly raised suspicious of the circumstances. And while you have had heavyweight coroners weigh in on Jeffrey Epstein, I also am writing a book that looks into some of these allegations and whether he committed suicide. And right now, as we sit here today, the Bureau of Prisons in the United States has redacted heavily documents of medical records preceding his death, where apparently he was sharing information about an assault that had taken place prior to his death. Also very suspiciously with Epstein's death is that his former cellmate also is no longer alive. So there are a lot of suspicious circumstances surrounding this entire case and this situation. There are definitely some very high profile names involved and allegations against high profile names. And so I think that we definitely need to get more information. We definitely need to see that toxicology report, but also with Virginia, just understanding the circumstances that led up to this situation, looking at her phone records, looking at who she was communicating with, what information might have been relayed to her or from her leading up to her death. I think that will be imperative.
Well, the circumstances leading up to her death, we do know a little bit about that. We know that her lawyer has said she was positive, planning for her future, but we also know from other reports that her friend says that being discredited was one of the many things distressing her in recent months. So being discredited, is that, I mean, perhaps you don't know specifically in Virginia's case, but in other victims' cases, is that always hanging over them?
I think it definitely is an area of concern. And with regards to Virginia's lawyer, Jeffrey Epstein's lawyers also said he was hopeful in future looking leading up to his death. So I think that we are seeing some parallels between these two circumstances as far as the information that's being relayed from people close to them. With regards to being discredited, I think that her situation and her allegations are more consistent with a typical situation of a child survivor of sexual abuse. I think that the allegations that she has made and the evidence that has been presented, she definitely had a very long history of sexual abuse, not just from Epstein, but from others as well. And so I think that understanding whether she was getting counseling and whether she was getting therapy and what that looked like will also be important. But being discredited is certainly an area of concern, but these allegations, you definitely need to look at what was going on in her life across the board.
Yes, and I think you've said in the past that Virginia Giuffre felt a lot of guilt because she was recruited by Ghislaine Maxwell and was then used to recruit others. Is that correct?
I think that is with Virginia's situation, but also with a number of Jeffrey Epstein's survivors. He definitely used children to recruit other children. And I'm sure that many of these young girls did feel guilt for introducing friends or others that were acquaintances of theirs to Jeffrey Epstein, given what occurred. This was his modus operandi. He would pay these girls around $200 to $300 for a massage. And then after they would give a massage and it might have turned erotic and involved molestation, he would offer them another $200 or $300 to recruit their friends. And so I think that there's certainly some guilt. There's certainly some blame that can occur within the legal system that can be viewed in certain circumstances as a certain area of culpability, but it's difficult because these are children we're talking about who are under the age of consent.
We talked about her fears of being discredited, according to her friends, and amazingly, shockingly, after her apparent suicide, Prince Andrew's ex-girlfriend said, "When lies catch up with you, there's no way out." It sounds incredibly a callous thing to say, but did she have to endure that, and do victims and alleged victims of sex trafficking have to endure that sort of harshness, that very skeptical approach from others all throughout their lives?
Well, so the thing here is that human trafficking is a very, very serious allegation. It is a form of modern slavery where somebody is enslaved. However, with that being said, there are situations where people might allege trafficking even if they're victims of other forms of crime because of the statute of limitations and because of the litigation advantages it offers. So there's a very famous article called Trafficking to the Rescue, and it's about how victims of sexual assault will plead their cases as trafficking because of litigation advantages it offers. I'm not saying that's what happened here, but I think that there are some who note that this circumstance and the allegations against Epstein at least are atypical of a trafficking situation at a minimum. What seems to be, what seems to be where all the evidence supports is that Epstein was sexually assaulting children, and Virginia Giuffre was one of those children. Now, all the other allegations that followed, I think that there are certain people that will sow seeds of doubt, perhaps because they didn't think that Epstein was a sex trafficker and he was, a sexual molester, a predator, a pedophile, as you had mentioned. But I think that it doesn't undermine the fact that this was a nefarious individual who took advantage of children. And I think that it certainly is, it's a difficult situation when you're dealing with the guilt, the shame, but also just the public eye of a high-profile sexual assault allegation. And I think that it certainly is in poor taste to comment negatively on somebody who's a mother, who is a survivor.
I think we can agree on that.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, I think we can agree on that, Kimberly. Just a final question. Virginia Giuffre received a very large settlement from Prince Andrew, and many people thought, well, if you're getting a couple of $1 million, you're going to be able to put your life back on the straight and narrow, and you're going to be able to recover and prosper and do well in the future. But clearly the money isn't enough for some people.
I don't think it's about the money. I think that and I think that's what the public needs to understand, when a child is a victim of assault of any kind, it can have lifelong consequences, regardless of what education, what financial situation they're in thereafter. It definitely does change fundamentally who they are as a person. And I think that it's very sad to know that the children of Ms. Giuffre will never see their mother again. And I think that it's just heartbreaking that anyone sees that as an option, regardless of what they live through. But it certainly does have life-altering consequences, regardless of any financial compensation that might come their way.
Kimberly Mehlman-Orozco, thank you so much for your analysis today. Really appreciate it. Thank you at home and on your phones for watching. If you want to see more of our Epstein content, do go online on YouTube. You'll find it when you click on these little thumbnails here. We hope you'll like, share, and subscribe our content. Until next time then, thank you for watching.